All right, and with that, let's go ahead and kick off our Security MegaCast event. I'm excited to introduce our first presenter today, and that is Mr. Scott Register. He's the VP of Security Products for Ixia. Are you there, Scott?
I am indeed, David. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Take it away.
All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining today. And I would like to go over a relatively new product from Ixia. It's certainly a security product, but maybe with a little different sort of twist or approach than you're used to. And when you think about even like David's comments earlier, there are breaches, headline breaches every day, right? We all know the risks, we know the cost of data breaches, and we know that these things happen all the time. But the funny thing is, behind each of those attacks, there's a security team in place, right? No one goes on the internet without a firewall. Typically, people have IPS and things like that. And so there is a suite of security tools, and typically very high-quality tools that are deployed. And these tools generate alerts, and those alerts typically are filtered up through something like a SIEM, like a security event manager, so you can view and collate all of your security logs to try to spot those breaches that still happen anyway. And why is this? Well, it turns out that only less than a third of those security alerts are ever even investigated. And because hackers aren't invisible when they're doing things, when they're attacking your network, when they're sneaking data out, etc., they are leaving footprints behind. But it takes, on average, about 170 days to detect a breach. So why is that? Why are these breaches still happening even when companies have security teams deployed and these great tools deployed? Why are these things happening? Why are we missing the clues? Well, the internet is really big, and it's full of basically, good and bad hosts. There are billions of hosts out there. Some are doing really good things, and some obviously do bad things. But the traffic from all of this kind of mixture of hosts is hitting your security infrastructure every day, right? Kind of, there's port scans, there's probes, and there's network breaches, there's phishing connections, there's malware connections coming at your network every day, mixed in with all the good traffic, and that constant, barrage of probes and scan traffic generates floods of alerts. We sometimes call it alert fatigue because there's so many. I mean, I certainly have spoken with customers that will have, up to like 10,000 alerts a day, and that's just way too many to manage, right? And somewhere in that flood, somewhere in that sea of all the security alerts and the SSH brute force, sirens that go off, somewhere in there might be the clue that you need to say, hey, I'm subject of a targeted, nation-state-backed, spear phishing attack. Someone's coming after me specifically, or I've got an active breach in my network and I'm leaking data out right now, but you can't see that because there's so many other alerts going off. You just can't filter down to that, to get to that important thing that you need. So that's really the kind of problem space that we decided to target. Not just how do we build a new detection capability, but how do we give you back time? How do we help you kind of wade through that sea of alerts so that you can find the critical things? A way to basically filter out all of the known bad IP addresses out there, phishing sites and malware controllers and internet scanning sites, and any countries that you don't trust. Right, so if you don't do business with, pick a country, Burkina Faso, why would you ever accept an inbound connection from there? If you don't do business with North Korea, why would you ever let traffic from your network go out to North Korea? Why don't you just block that all entirely? If there are sites that are botnet controllers, why would you ever let a system inside your network talk to that? So if you can take, and I apologize, the animations may be moving very quickly here. If you can take all of that traffic off of your network, all this invalid or known bad or just untrusted traffic, if you can take all of that off of your network, then your security tools and the teams that operate them become much more efficient because they're dealing with much less stuff, like a much lower volume of malicious traffic, and you can more easily get to those critical events. And so if you look at the data behind this, the average big company in the U.S. spends something like 21,000 hours a year just dealing with security alerts, many of which turn out to be either false positive or certainly low value, right? It's just an automated probe. It's a scan. It's the same thing that I found when I set up this device on my home network and got over 100 probes an hour. That's not something coming after me specifically. It's just an automated probe. But if I'm running an IPS or I'm running a SIM, that's still generating an alert that I have to look at and figure out if it's valid or not. So by getting rid of a third of these, which in production networks is actually a really low estimate, we can basically save you, over 6,000 hours a year. That's a return on investment of over 15x. So basically a product that pays for itself in less than a month. And that product is ThreatArmor from Ixia. It's an inline security device. We call it a threat intelligence gateway because really what it's doing is taking our vast threat intelligence database and applying it directly to your network to get rid of known bad IP addresses in untrusted countries. You effectively deploy a single ThreatArmor device around your existing security infrastructure. It's got two interface pairs, one on the inside, one on the outside. The outside pair really scrubs all of that incoming traffic for things like, untrusted companies and brute force attacks and port scans and things like that. The internal set will block outbound connections to things like botnet controllers, phishing sites, or connection attempts to hijacked IP ranges. And because it's on the inside of the firewall, we can actually see what internal IP address is responsible for those connections and let you know. So when you come into the office Wednesday morning and say, wow, I've got these 8 systems on my network, all of whom are suddenly trying to connect to botnet controllers, well, not only are we stopping those connections, but you can see which systems those are. Those are the ones that need to go clean up right away. So that helps you prioritize your time. Now, this is certainly not a replacement for like a firewall or an IPS or a SIM. We're really just trying to make those more efficient. And Ixia offers a pretty broad set of tools, security and network visibility tools, designed to make security deployments more efficient. We have things like bypass switches that will let you do flexible failover. Let's say you have an IPS and you need to take it offline for an upgrade. Well, you don't want your network go down, so we can detect that that device is down, sort of fail around it. We can do load balancing across multiple firewalls, multiple IPSs, things like that. So we have lots of ways to make sure that your network is more secure, give you more uptime, give you more performance, and by adding ThreatArmor to the mix, we're also reducing the amount of malicious traffic that ever hits your security infrastructure, so you can focus on the really high-value things, like I said, the targeted attacks or the successful or ongoing breaches. So one of the questions we get a lot, and it's a great question, is how is this different from a firewall, right? Doesn't my next-gen firewall, pick your favorite vendor, well, it has something about threat intelligence, and it says it can block, bad IP addresses. Well, there's a pretty big difference architecturally between ThreatArmor and next-gen firewalls. They're typically built for great kind of app layer functionality, meaning they do deep packet inspection, and they can do sandboxing, and they can look at binaries that are being downloaded and unpack them and try to execute them and see if they do bad things. They'll do user-based policies and VPN termination and all of that stuff, and that's great. But what they're not so good at is just blocking very large numbers of IP addresses. Certainly, IPs in the range of like the ThreatArmor database, what we call the rap sheet database. Next-gen firewall, depending on how much you spend on it, will typically run out of capacity somewhere between 10,000 and 40,000 IP ranges, which is far less than the rap sheet database that we put into ThreatArmor. And ThreatArmor was purpose-built just for doing this very, very large-scale IP blocking. In fact, it's not rule-based, so there's no additional latency when you block more stuff. It doesn't matter if you're blocking 1 or a million or a billion IP addresses in ThreatArmor. You always get very low latency, very consistent performance, full line rate, even with minimal packet sizes. And that's something that firewalls just can't do because they weren't built for it. ThreatArmor can manage every IP address on the internet with no impact on performance. And so by offloading that kind of large-scale blocking, you can actually get better performance out of your security devices because they're dealing with less like malicious traffic they have to inspect, so their performance goes up for the good traffic that remains. So Ixia, I realize, isn't necessarily sort of a household name in the security world, but we've actually been in the security and threat intelligence business for well over a decade now. And really what we've built historically is the kind of threat intelligence that security vendors and service providers use to test their devices and their networks when they're developing them. So any firewall vendor who's developing a device or a router or anything like that they need to know how fast is it, what kind of attacks can it stand up to, things like that, have used Ixia's breaking point devices to test that. It's just that there was no way for really an enterprise customer to have direct access into all of our threat research other than through our test gear. And now, through ThreatArmor, you can do that. You can access that threat intel. And one of the ways that we do that is for any site that we block, we show you on screen on the admin console something called a rap sheet. And a rap sheet shows very clear proof of exactly why a site was blocked. And so every single site in the rap sheet database, we, Ixia, have gone out and independently verified, and we recheck every single site every single day. And if we ever find that a site has been cleaned up, we remove it from the threat database, right? So we stop blocking it. So this really lowers any risk of false positives, and you can see exactly why something was blocked, including download path, binary checksum, the name of the malware, and even things like screenshots. So if the malware has an installer, we've got screenshots of the installer going off. Or if it's a phishing site that looks like it's Bank of America but really isn't, we'll show you a screenshot of that page so you can see exactly why the site was bad, exactly why it was blocked. Now, I said earlier we're trying to give you time, not take it away. So we've made this very, very simple to operate. Basically, you do a quick setup, and then it's self-maintaining, kind of fire and forget, built for very high reliability. So it doesn't take a lot of ongoing attention. It shouldn't take time from you administratively. And again, the reason that we're able to give such high performance is we were built from day one, from scratch, to do this IP-based blocking at very, very large scale, at internet scale blocking with no performance impact. And so it doesn't matter, again, how many things you're blocking, you never see a performance degradation. There's no latency change. And we were designed exactly to do this, and that's all we're trying to do. And so that makes it very fast and very reliable and also very simple to operate. Now, we know that this is an inline device, and so availability is very important. So one of the things that we've integrated into the chassis is our NetOptics bypass switches, which I mentioned earlier, that help to maintain complete availability. We've actually integrated that technology directly into the chassis. So even if you, through the UI or through the front panel buttons want to trigger bypass mode, or even if you pull the dual redundant power cables out of the back of the system, there's a mechanical fail to wire. So traffic keeps flowing, very minimal interruption. There's no software involved. So if there's any kind of failure or even someone can't reach a site, you want to eliminate ThreatArmor as a potential source of any of that, you just pull the power or trigger bypass mode, and we're out of the loop, and photons or electrons continue to flow, and the network stays up. It takes about half an hour to go from cutting the packing tape on the box to up and running. You simply cable it up, and we include a pretty easy quick start guide. So hook up the Ethernet cables or the power cables, and we do offer both 1 gig copper and 10 gig fiber versions of this. Now, when you first connect the device to the network, it's in reporting mode, so you can see exactly what we would block before we actually start taking action. So if you just want to validate everything's hooked up right, or see what kind of things we're seeing on the network that maybe you didn't know about, then when you're ready, you just click on reporting mode, and it will change modes. And then really, that's it. By default, the device updates itself every 5 minutes, so there's no ongoing tuning and maintenance. The only things you might manually do, you can do manual whitelist or blacklist. So let's say you're being attacked from some certain external IP address that we don't know about. You can either through the UI or through a REST API send a command that says, hey, block this site forever, or for the next 2 hours, or 2 days. And if you want to do geo-blocking, let's say you decide that you don't trust some particular country, you can just come over to the UI and click on that country and say, hey, block this guy. Now, here's an example. One of our customers, a service provider, actually in Japan, they were having, it's a pretty large installment, and they were having over 3 million attacks on their web servers a day. And so they were trying to manually manage, all the IPSs, do router-based access lists to eliminate, bad IP addresses that they saw on the outside. They had tried host-based firewalls, but those were running out of capacity at, a few 100,000 IPs. So basically, they hadn't found an efficient way to get all of their security alerting and security blocking under control. So they deployed Threat Armor, and with, again, no tuning, saw an immediate reduction in IPS from alerts from 1 million to 200,000, right? And they no longer had to do all the manual router access list configuration. They no longer had to muck with the host-based firewalls. With all the other blocking they wanted to do, they could do directly on Threat Armor. So that resulted in a huge time savings for them. Far fewer alerts. The ones that they actually saw were more meaningful and things they actually needed to pay attention to, and it saved them, hundreds of hours a week just in trying to maintain their security. And again, the whole process took them about 30 minutes, start to finish. So pretty typical case study, but one that we're certainly happy to talk about. So really, that's it. Threat Armor is a threat intelligence gateway. It takes the large output from Ixia's what we call the ATI, Application and Threat Intelligence Research Center, and lets you apply it directly to your network with minimal effort. The whole point is making your existing security tools and teams much more efficient by getting rid of the bulk of the invalid or unwanted traffic from your network. And it really is the fastest way to improve your network security. And so now I will switch over to a quick demo. So here is the Threat Armor UI from system installed. Oops, here we go. Here is the Threat Armor UI from a system installed here on our network. So when you bring it up, you can select a time range. So I want to see the last 5 minutes, the last hour, the last week, et cetera, and we'll show you how many connections we've blocked, inbound and outbound, how many total connections have gone through, how much traffic we've allowed and blocked, and some overall stats on link utilization. You can see here highlighted in red countries with traffic that we've blocked in the last, in this case, 24 hours. So I can see that I've blocked 10 connections from France. That's 30 blocked traffics, and I've blocked, 30 blocked packets, and blocked 2.5 kilobytes of traffic. Similarly, I can click on any other blocked or any other country that shows up red and see the statistics for that country. Now, if I want more details, then I just click here, and I can see a number of additional pieces of drill down information. Here at the bottom, you see there's the top allowed and bottom allowed countries. So So this just means that the traffic that's flowing in and out of your network that we're not stopping, what's the breakdown percentage-wise by country. The bottom allowed countries, this shows countries that are connecting very infrequently. So this is, from Tunisia at one connection attempt in the last 24 hours. The reason that we show you this is if you're only getting one connection from a particular country per day, that's probably a really good candidate for blocking. That's the kind of thing you might want to say, hey, you know what, or maybe you go look at your access logs, your firewall logs, and drill down. But basically, these are really good candidates for geo-blocking. There's a good chance that was just a probe or a port scan or something like that, and you can improve your security and reduce the number of alerts you're getting just by adding these countries to your block list. Now, I can also see the last things that I've blocked coming on and off the network. If I click on one of those, I can see additional drill down information. And here on the right is what we call the wrap sheet. So I see I blocked this IP address that was in the U.S. or advertised as being in the U.S. That was hijacked, which means someone has taken that IP range and basically redirected it to a different site. Here's a site that was performing an SSH brute force attack. So that doesn't mean that we detected this on the fly in this case, because we're blocking it at the first packet. That means that our extensive network of honeypots and threat analysis engines have shown that this IP address is actively performing SSH brute force attacks. And we last verified that September 6th, so that would have been yesterday at 10:30, so we know it's recent information. And sure enough, if I click on connection stats, I can see that it was trying to connect to port 22, which is in fact the SSH port. I can also, let's see, we'll find another example here. I can also do things like look up IP information on a blocked host and see, what the DNS info is, what is the BGP ASN, what subnet. I can see if it has multiple host names associated, which of those sites we've seen malicious info for and which we have not. Here's just one more example of a wrap sheet that shows, here's the URL of this particular Trojan that we found. Here's the checksum. So if you want to cross-reference that with something else, the last time that we found that particular piece of code there, and if you click on this, you'll actually get a close-up of the web page that is distributing that malware. And here's again additional information. Here I see that site has lots of different host names associated with it. Some are malicious, and many others were not in this case. And some just other quick information for showing things like switching between reporting and blocking is as easy as clicking there. The threat intelligence and geolocation updates are all automated. The only thing that you click on if there's a new system update, we'll download that and we'll tell you it's available, but we won't actually install it without your confirmation, because typically security admins like to be involved in that decision. We do log all events over syslog, so if you want to send syslog events to Splunk or your SIM or something else, that is easy enough to do. And with that, I will open it up if there are any questions. So, David?
Yeah, Scott, there are some questions here for you, actually quite a few. So, let's see, let me bring up this slide here. So, questions. So, questions from the audience here. One of the first ones is they're asking, how does Threat Armor avoid false positives?
Sure. Okay. So if you look here at the wrap sheet data, so we only block sites that we have individually validated within the last, it's less than 3 days, about 2.5 days. So anything that we block, we're not blocking because, we just subscribe to some other feed and they say, oh, we think this is bad. We go out and check every single site that we block, and we check it every single day. So we really stay on top of, this site is currently acting as a botnet controller, or it's currently performing SSH brute force attacks. Like, we know right now that this server has been compromised or is involved in a malware campaign. Now, in the example of multi-hosting sites, like a CDN site or something like that, GoDaddy is a good example. There could be like 1,000 domains associated with a single IP address. So in that case, we're not doing URL filtering, but we do look at the domain name on a request. And I showed, I don't know if this one has it, but I showed earlier we could show the domain information. Oh, here's a good example. Here's a phishing site. So we see malicious host names and then host names also associated with that IP that we have not proven to be malicious. So if you're trying to connect to one of these, we will block the connection attempt. But if you're connecting to one where we don't have proven malicious activity, then we don't stop it. But we're very careful that anything we block only because we have individually validated, within the last 3 days that site is bad, and we show you complete proof about why it's bad. So here, this particular site that we blocked, here's 2 Trojans and evidence of phishing activity that we found at that particular site. Hopefully that answered the question.
Absolutely. Yeah, nice. So another question here is about latency. When you insert threat armor into the network, does that add latency?
So, of course, it adds some. Under typical load, it's about 7 milliseconds per interface pair. So about 14 overall for the device, and that's probably a fifth of what you would see from a typical firewall. So it does add latency, but again, because we're doing all packet level inspection, we're not trying to do DPI, the latency is very, very low, and certainly less than what you would see out of a firewall or an IPS.
Very nice, and it also takes off a lot of load from the firewall, so the firewall can do its job much more efficiently.
That's correct.
Awesome. Another question here is about, can you compare threat intelligence to just a traditional firewall? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, so the big difference, and lots of firewalls have ways that you can plug in like external threat intelligence feeds. And I won't name the vendors. There's lots of threat intel feeds out there, and I'm certainly not saying that they're bad, but they're typically more useful for forensics. Like if you're researching an IP, you can learn more about it or learn what malicious activity has been associated with the site historically than for doing real-time blocking. And we're really optimized for real-time blocking. And a lot of that comes down to that, like the proof of malicious activity. If you look at most threat intel feeds, they'll have a confidence score. So there is a score of 62% or 75 or 83 or whatever, which basically means how certain they are that this site is bad at that time. Now, behind the scenes, what that often means is they got that threat data from somewhere else and haven't validated it, and they're just assigning kind of a degree of confidence to that external feed that they're taking in. That means that you, as the security administrator, have to make ongoing decisions about, well, how do I tune this? Like, do I block something if I'm 75% sure it's bad, or I'm 82, or I'm 85% sure? We only block things when we're 100% sure that they're bad, so we take all that kind of guesswork and tuning out of the equation. The other big difference between, threat armor and trying to just import a threat intel feed into a typical next-gen firewall is the scale issue that I mentioned in the presentation. You're going to run out of capacity pretty quickly if you start trying to do things like geo-blocking or blocking hijacked IP ranges or things. I mean, we're easily talking scale in the tens of millions, and firewall is going to run out of capacity somewhere around, like that 10 to 40,000 IP ranges. So there's just not enough memory, kind of horsepower to handle blocking at that scale if you try to do a bulk import of some threat intel feed.
Very cool. Very cool. So, Scott, we've got, I see 34 other questions for you in the queue.
Okay.
So obviously lots of interest, very cool, unique, security products. I think we've run out of time for the live Q&A, though. If you don't mind staying on and answering some of those, we would appreciate it.
Yeah,
great presentation. Yeah, thanks for joining us today, Scott.
All right, thank you. My pleasure. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in.